Dana's story. My name is Dana Woodruff Patterson, and I am 45 years old. I recently moved back to my old hometown of Royal Oak, Michigan. This move was a chance to start my life over for the third time and maybe forget about some of the stupid things I've done. I will be teaching history at a community college here in town. A few years ago, I would never have accepted such a position because I thought I was destined for academic greatness. I was going to write articles and books and turn the history world upside down. But no, I did not come to this delusion alone. I was led down a path, kicking and screaming away from what I now realize was a wonderful life by people I thought had superior intellect and character. I wanted so badly to be like them that I turned my back on all that was good in my life. And too late I found out that they were just using me. No matter how smart I wanted to think I was, to them I was just a dumb rag. They're probably still laughing at me now in California. After 6 years, I had to stick my ass back home to try to pick up the pieces and move on. That's why I'm here. Before we get too far, let me describe myself. I'm fairly short in stature, barely reaching 5 feet. I have short, straight brown hair and hazel eyes. I'm a little fat. I'm not fat, but I'm curvy. Probably my best features are my legs. To tell you the truth, they're beautiful. They are thick, toned, and just very muscular. In a short skirt, I'm just dynamite. This is what attracted my ex-husband to me in the first place, and unfortunately, what attracted my professors to me and lured me out of a happy marriage. Speaking of the ex, he's been on my mind a lot lately. Leaving him was, of course, the biggest and stupidest mistake I ever made. Not that I had much of a choice. Nope, I'm sure you've heard this story a million times. Happily married couple, she goes back to work, or in my case, school. While there, she discovers more excitement with a new class of people. She discovers what was missing in her previously happy marriage and is seduced by the dark side. She ends up having fun with her boss, or in my case, the chair of the college history department. He then promises to help her realize her potential and embrace her destiny as a doctor, lawyer, or Indian chief. In my case, I was destined to become a brilliant historian, and he was going to lead me to academic success on a level that I could never have achieved with my boring old husband. And naturally, he also brought me right into his bed. At first, it was just the thrill of illicit fun with a man I thought was brilliant. Then he told me that I needed to expand my horizons intellectually as well. Then, of course, my husband found out and kicked me out for cheating. I still remember the day he and his private investigator cornered us in the professor's office and handed me the divorce papers. The professor said something really stupid, and Dan grabbed him by the throat. He looked at him and then just put him on the ground and actually apologized. At that moment, I realized that he actually turned out to be smarter than that. I couldn't even bring myself to look him in the eye after seeing how I had broken his heart. He refused to have anything to do with me. He never spoke to me again. He didn't even go to court. He just gave me everything and disappeared. None of our old, or should I say his old friends, passed him any messages or had anything to do with me. The college did fire my old professor and settled out of court with Dan. My professor and I began to move on with our lives. I had no other choice. There was nothing left for me here. Once we settled in California, I noticed that the professor started passing me around to some of his colleagues. All in the name of career advancement, he told me. After a few years, this became the norm. After a while, I began to feel more like a his whore Ian than a historian. Then I noticed that many other historians were getting better teaching assignments or research grants. They got them because of their hard work or intelligence, while I only got screwed, and in more than one sense. I guess by the time I noticed that there was never any tenderness or emotion in the act, it was too late. I was shocked to learn that the professor had no intention of ever marrying me. In fact, he told me that I was not the kind of woman that men marry, that I needed more variety than any man could give me. Meanwhile, no one ever really kissed me, hugged me, or did anything to me just to spend time with me. In short, no one cared about me at all. The final straw was when I got out of the shower after entertaining one of the professor's 70-year-old girlfriends and heard them talking about me. Apparently, I really wasn't up to their intellectual level. In fact, according to them, I wasn't smart enough to teach history in high school, let alone college. I spent a lot of time in tears afterward, and I had to make some tough choices. I couldn't sue the school or anyone else because everything I did was voluntary. The professor wasn't married, but he did have a long-term relationship with a physics professor from England. She didn't care who he was having fun with as long as he came home when she called him. Long story short, I got fired for bringing it up anyway. Admittedly, they agreed not to tarnish my record with a notice about it, so I could look for work elsewhere. So I came home to Royal Oak. The community college here is very nice. While it is not an important institution, it does its job for the people it serves. My classes start in 3 days, so on Friday afternoon I rode my bike around campus to familiarize myself with the surroundings. As I passed an outdoor cafe, I looked across the street and saw 2 cars stopped at a stoplight that appeared to be racing. They were 2 similar-looking Mustang GTs. One was a red convertible with black trim, and the other was a black coupe with red trim. The driver of the black car got out of the car at the same time as the other driver. At first, I thought there was going to be a fight, or at least yelling. They met between cars while the stream of cars behind them waited for the light to change. The driver of the red car was a striking young woman. The other driver kissed her when they met. Now that was a kiss. They both put their whole souls into it, as if they might never see each other again. I smiled, remembering what that felt like, and how long it had been since anyone had felt that way about me. The driver of the red car, the girl, now that I could see her face, was beautiful. She was about 5 feet 1 inch tall, slender but shapely. I had experimented with women a couple times over the past few years, and although I wasn't really bi or gay, I would do it with her. She had long red hair and big, innocent eyes. From a distance, I couldn't make out their color, but her face was glowing. She had that glow that only women in love have. It was a glow that transcended notions of physical beauty and attractiveness. She pulled the baseball cap off the other driver and held out her hand. He handed her his jacket, and she put the jacket and cap on backwards and stepped into the cafe, tossing her keys to the valet. Amidst the cacophony of honks from other drivers as the light changed, the other driver turned around and got back into his car. As he pulled away, I noticed that he was at least twice her age, though in incredible shape. I stood there with my mouth open and watched his car disappear. Now I'm sure he's at least twice her age because he's the same age as me. I no longer have to guess at the whereabouts of my ex-husband and soulmate. I found him. What the hell was going on between him and that girl? Dan and Alex. My name is Dan Patterson. About 6 years ago, I found out that my wife Dana was cheating on me. We had a great life and I thought we had a solid marriage. I was devastated. I wanted to just die, but life goes on. After a while, I went back to work. I got a few $100,000 in a settlement agreement from her old school, but I still worked to help myself get over Dana. For a couple years, I just worked. I didn't date or socialize at all because I really thought there was something wrong with me. Eventually, the woman I loved apparently found other men who were better than me. My love for her just wasn't enough. After a while, I began to realize that the manufacturing industry here in Michigan was in trouble. I decided to go back to school and get my degree. Truthfully, I guess in the back of my mind I thought that if I had been smarter, Dana wouldn't have left me. I chose business management and was terrified. 1,000 thoughts ran through my head. What if you're not smart enough? You're too old to go back to school. All the kids will laugh at you. You won't fit in. You'll never make it. But I got in anyway. The first couple of semesters went by fast. I got straight A's. I was getting a 4.0. I started to think that maybe I wasn't so stupid after all. I still wasn't dating. I especially couldn't date anyone in high school. I was closer in age to the faculty than the students. Starting something with a faculty member was more trouble than it was worth. And the thought of starting something vaguely romantic with one of these young girls made me feel like a pervert. Then I met Alex in trigonometry class, and without my knowledge, consideration, or consent, my life began anew. We ended up in a study group together. We were studying with 5, 6 other students from our class. After a while, we began to notice that other than the 2 of us, no one was doing much studying. So at her suggestion, we became a group of 2. Spending time with people either brings you closer together or points out your differences. In our case, we became friends very quickly. It got to the point where I loved the time spent with her and couldn't wait to see her again. At first, we were sometimes very awkward. Some guy would come up to our table and start trying to talk to her in front of me as if I wasn't there. I wasn't really there, I was just an old guy after all. Sometimes she would use me as a shield to ward off the bolder ones. That's how our first fight started. I told her that I thought it was unfair of her to use me to avoid dealing with the bad parts of her social life. She should be able to just say yes to the good guys and no to the bad guys herself and leave me out of it. I guess my tongue was too strong. In hindsight, if I had really explored my feelings, I would have realized I was just jealous. Either way, she just picked up her books and walked out of the library. After that, I only saw Alex in class. We didn't sit together or talk. I often caught her watching me out of the corner of her eye but never looked back. She easily joined another study group. I had offers because my grades were excellent, but I preferred to study alone. 2 whole weeks later, the stalemate continued, and it probably would have continued even now if fate hadn't intervened. One evening, walking back to my car, I saw one of the guys from her new study group trying to force Alex into his car. She wouldn't stand for it and resisted every inch of the way. Before I realized what I was doing, I jumped between them and grabbed him by the collar. He let go of Alex in surprise and turned to face me. "Be a tough guy," he told me. "It's just a misunderstanding." I let go of him and saw Alex picking up her books with tears rolling down her face. "Damn tease," I heard the guy mutter. Hearing the guy's words, Alex started sobbing and something in my brain clicked. I turned around and grabbed the guy and punched him. I reached down and helped Alex up and hugged her. I walked her to her car and stayed there until she left. I almost didn't make it back to class. And even though I really didn't feel like it, I went anyway. But instead of arriving early, I made sure I was one of the last ones to enter the room. I sat far in the back, instead of sitting near the entrance, as was my usual habit. Glancing at the board, I saw Alex looking around and ducked behind the back of the girl sitting in front of me. The teacher had given us an assignment that we had to complete in groups. So I worked with 3 people in front of me and on either side of me. It was pretty simple work. Unit circle, converting angular dimensions to radians, and periodicity. I didn't see what it had to do with business, but busy work is busy work. We were almost done when the teacher gave us a break. We had used the correct formula, but our answers weren't quite right. We just needed a little tweaking to finish. During the break, my group mates left the room to smoke or something. I stayed in my seat and started reading the book on my iPhone. I was halfway through the first page when I heard movement from the front of the room. I knew it was the sound of Alex's footsteps, and let's face it, I could always feel her from across the room. So I stood up and walked out of the room without dignifying her with a glance. I came back from break at the last minute, and Alex was sitting in my seat. The 2 girls I was working with probably didn't care, but another guy in our group told me that she was working alone and wanted to join our group. He said he noticed that she and I were friends, so he didn't think I would mind. I think everyone there knew what was going on. The guys were just doing everything for Alex. I said no problem. Then grabbed my textbooks from under my desk and moved to another row. Working on the problems, I found our mistake and changed my answers. I turned in my work, listing myself and I as members of my group. After class, my instructor didn't find it as funny as I did, but she softened a bit when I told her that it was a group dynamics problem, and that instead of creating a problem, I had decided to step out of the situation. Alex was waiting for me outside the classroom. This woman had the biggest blue eyes you've ever seen. When I walked out of the classroom, she was there, of course. And she uttered those words that women always preface any seemingly serious situation with. "We need to talk," she said very quietly. "No, we don't," I replied, in an equally dosed manner to match both her tone and her demeanor. "Yes, you do," she replied more emphatically. "Why?" I asked. I don't think Alex was ready for that, and she just stood there pondering as I walked away. Unfortunately, I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. In my mind, I saw that she was just going with the flow, and I wouldn't have to deal with her until class next week. We probably won't have another group assignment for a while yet, and if I continue to show up late and disappear right after class and at recess, I can avoid her for the near future. After a while, it will stop mattering, and I probably won't see her much after this class. The odds of us being in very many classes together in a school of this size were not very high. It wasn't impossible, but just unlikely. Anyway, that was my plan. Alexander Graham Bell, of course, messed up my plan. All she had to do was reach out and touch someone, namely me. I was so busy thinking about her that I didn't look at the caller ID and just picked up the phone when she called. "Hi," I answered. "Okay, where do you live? I don't want to talk on the phone," she said. "Why not?" I asked. "And if we can't talk on the phone, I think it would be better to meet on neutral ground." "What? So you can just walk away and continue to avoid and ignore me?" she asked. "Nah, we need to get this over with and get back to normal." "How do you define normal?" I asked. "You ask the weirdest questions," she replied. "So where do you live?" I gave her my address, but told her I would meet her in the common area near the lobby of the building. 10 minutes later, she walked into the hall, and everyone in attendance stopped what they were doing to look at her. She quickly saw me and walked over. She sat down across from me and smiled. "Okay, what's up your ass?" she asked. "Nothing," I replied. "Then why are you so mad at me?" she asked. Her face was pensive but still so beautiful. It was hard for me to understand why it meant so much to her. She was very smart besides being beautiful and could easily find someone else to study with. "Let's see, if I remember, you were the one stomping out of the library," I said. "Only after you accused me of using you," she parried. "Then you turned what was supposed to be a small argument into World War III. I'm sure you don't realize it, but the next day I was constantly trying to get your attention in class." She stared at me intently as she spoke, and I had to look away. "I wanted to talk to you then," she said. "But you wouldn't even look at me, and I got mad too. I thought that if I moved to another study group, you'd have to come and talk to me or tell me off. But you didn't. It was like you just didn't care. And then that asshole grabbed me. I'm sorry I said that." "What?" I asked. "The A word," she smiled as she said it. "It fits," I said. "Anyway, do you know how many people saw him trying to get me into his car and just kept going?" she asked. "Not you, of course, so then I realized you still cared and looked forward to class today. I almost couldn't wait those 3 days. I was hoping you would call me, but you didn't. I started calling you hundreds of times, but you know." She shrugged. "I got to class early anyway," she said. "I got here an hour early so we could talk." Again, the laser focus of her eyes made me wince. "And you didn't show up. Every time the door opened, I practically jumped out of my seat," she said. "Then finally, Miss Vanya came in. And since you always come early, I figured you'd miss class. And I thought it was a good thing." Then I interrupted her. "Why is it a good thing that I won't be in class?" No, you idiot. I wanted you to come to class. But if you weren't there, you'd have to copy someone else's notes and have them explain new material to you, right?" I nodded, but I didn't understand what she was getting at. "Who do you think would have volunteered?" she asked. "It would be an easy way for us to talk." She was smiling now and moved closer to me. Then I looked over when she handed out the assignment for the group, and there you were. "But you were looking anywhere but at me, and I realized you were still upset." "I'm not upset," I said. "No, you're just being uncharacteristically stupid," she smiled. "So I decided I wasn't going to put up with any more of this crap. When we went on break, I was going to just walk over and talk to you. But you just walked away. I didn't put up with it, so I just joined your group and waited for you." She moved close enough to me that I could smell her perfume, and I started to get nervous, but she just kept talking. "And you just left the band and worked with someone else. Those 2 nerd girls were really mean to me after you left. Anyway, that's where we are now," she said. "Where is that?" I asked. "The place where we discuss our problems and work to solve them," she replied. "So what do you hope to accomplish here?" I asked. "You're not listening to me," she said irritably. "I want us to get back to normal." "Here we go again," I said. "Define normal. We're doing a 16-week course together, right?" She nodded. "We're about halfway through the course, right?" She nodded again. "There are a lot of people in our class, right?" She nodded. "Do you get along with everyone in the class?" I asked. "Of course not," she replied. "Isn't it a fact that in just 8 short weeks or less, we'll graduate from this class and probably never see most of these people again?" I asked. "Probably," she replied. "But what's your point?" "We worked together for a while. We came to a difference of opinion. We quit working together," I said, looking at her. "We went our separate ways. We both get good grades. Classes end, life goes on, credits roll, the end," I said. "That would be a very depressing movie," she said softly. "But then again, I always get it wrong anyway." She looked very sad. "Do you know how I felt after what you told me?" she asked. "I felt really bad, mostly because it was kind of true, but not really." But by the next day, I felt different. She pulled even closer to me again. Angry? I asked. Nope, not even close, she replied. I just felt alone. What? I asked. I'm taking 4 classes right now, she said. I hate math, always have. We were sitting so close now that our hands were touching. Ask me what my favorite subject is, she said. It's your comp lit class, I said. How do you know that? She asked. You told me about it the first week, I answered her. And you memorized it? She smirked. But things have changed since then. Question number 2. What color are my eyes? She asked, closing them. Too easy, I said. They're blue and get a little darker when you get stuck or upset. And they move from side to side when you say the numbers. See what I mean? She said, as if she'd made a great point. Dan, you're my only friend here. There are plenty of people here who want to be your friend, I said. Nah, most of them only want one thing, she said. How old do you think I am? She asked. Too easy, you're 23, I said. Do you know why it took me so long to start school? She asked. I got married about a year after I graduated high school. I came from a small town and planned to work for a while before going to college. I met a guy and we dated for a while. Once we got engaged, my life got better because all the guys who were following me around realized that and backed off, she says. I sat and listened to her and wondered why she was telling me all this. But I couldn't walk away because I just loved being around her. I'm not stupid. I know what I look like. But I'm really not that kind of girl, she said. I'm always trying to get ahead with my brains and accomplishments, but almost no one gives me a chance. I waited until after we were married to pursue it, but Steve was so persuasive. Her voice got a little harder, and I realized she was about to tell me something she wasn't proud of. In our town, there was a traditional dance at the Harvest Ball. 2 nights before the ball, I let him have my cherry. By the night of the dance, everyone knew he had screwed me. It was all over town. Do you know what his excuse was? I felt sorry for her. I could tell she was still a little hurt. I shook my head. He told me it was such a special occasion and such a beauty that he had to tell people about it. And he was doing it for me because a lot of people in town thought I was gay, but he changed their minds. I looked at her because I couldn't believe someone would try to pass off such a stupid sentence. Anyway, I forgave him and we got married, she said. He cheated on me on our honeymoon with a maid. All my life I just wanted to get married and have a family. Just to be a wife and a mother and maybe have a job that I would enjoy. Besides, he was having fun with most of my friends at the time. He was doing it because even when we were dating, he was cheating on me and saw no reason to stop. I overheard him telling one of his friends that I was a trophy that was nice to look at, but basically useless in bed. He won me, so he has the trophy, but that's no reason to ruin his life. My supposed friends, on the other hand, were divided into 2 groups. Group A was jealous of the way I looked and thought it was fun to secretly date my husband behind my back. Group B were just sluts. So I divorced him and got some great compensation. What's 50% of nothing? She asked. Listening to her, I had a completely different idea of what her life must have been like. I came here to start my career and get a fresh start in life. And the guys here are all the same. No one gives me credit for having a single thought in my head. They just want a piece of ass. And the funny thing is, like with Steve, if they get it, they tend to move on. They just plant the flag, tell the story, and move on to the next conquest. Nice guys are so intimidated by me that they rarely ask me out, and most of them act about the same once you break through their shyness. And then there's you. You actually listen to me all the time and memorize what I tell you. And you look me in the face! Do you know I've caught you a few times just looking at my face? I like the time we spend together. I was planning on us taking other classes together after this course. As for using you, I guess I did to some extent. I let people think you were in the boy fiend slot, but only because you seemed to volunteer for the job. She looked at me again. I kind of thought you liked me a little too. And then you just dismissed me like I didn't matter, and that really hurt me. She bit her plump lower lip, and my heart melted. So I wanted to see if you'd be jealous because I was working with those guys, but I just got in trouble and you still had to come and rescue me, she said. Alex, I'm just not good with people, I said. First of all, your measly 24 years of life is nothing. I'm almost twice your age. 6 years ago, I went through almost the same thing you did. After a long marriage to a woman I considered my partner for life, she not only cheated on me, she left me. At least you were strong enough to pick up your pieces and move on. I haven't dated or socialized since then, period. I'm not sure I can be considered suitable company, much less a friend to anyone. Anyway, Alex and I made up and passed the trigonometry exam. And we started taking classes together. It was easy because we were both in business programs and had many of the same requirements. Over the next few months, we always studied together, even when we didn't need to. She started talking about how we needed to go to different places sometimes to observe how successful as well as unsuccessful companies do business. We also needed to study different types of businesses to see what type of business might work for each of us. We went to restaurants, visited museums, and shopped together. Finally, she asked me to go to a dance club that someone had told her about in one of the few classes we hadn't taken together. Alex, I said curiously, shouldn't you ask someone else to go there? Why would I do that? She snapped back. Her eyes got kind of narrow, and by then I knew enough to be cautious in the wording of my next statement. Well, going to a dance club doesn't really sound like research, I said. What does it look like? She asked. Her eyes flashed, letting me know to proceed with caution. It's more like socializing, I began. You mean it feels like a date, she said. She leaned back and put one tiny hand on her hip. Exactly, I said, and I've already explained my position on socializing. I'm just not ready for it. Dan, she said, looking at me the way you look at a 4-year-old. We go shopping together, don't we? She asked. We go to museums, don't we? We go out to eat together all the time, don't we? In all this time, have you ever once heard me mention that I'm going to do these things or anything else with anyone else? I stopped and thought for a moment. Well, I guess I just assumed you had, I said. Dan, we've been dating for months. I think everyone knows about it except you, she said. So why can't we go dancing, Dana? After getting over my shock at seeing my ex-husband with this girl, I stood outside for a few minutes. I hadn't really recovered. I don't know what I was thinking. I guess in the back of my mind I started thinking that maybe if Dan still lived in the neighborhood and hadn't remarried, or maybe even if he did, we might have a chance. I knew that if I hadn't messed up, we'd still be together today. But seeing him with that girl made me feel awkward. Before I realized it, I was already following her into the cafe. It was crowded and noisy with some music playing. As she made her way to a table in the back, I watched her. She was definitely popular. And everyone seemed to know her. It seemed like half the place was talking to her on the way to the table she sat at. There were already people at the table she chose. She ordered something to drink. I watched as several men, guys, anyone approached her and asked her to dance. She just said no every time. She was talking to people at her table. They were probably friends. She also took out a notebook from time to time and made notes in it. I had to admit that she was very pretty and a very popular girl. But that still didn't explain what she was doing with my Dan. Maybe she was an escort or a prostitute? That would explain a lot. Dan was so broken after I broke his heart that he could no longer form a normal relationship and had to date prostitutes. If she was the center of attraction at the cafe, I was the complete opposite. I couldn't even summon a waiter. I guess I was expecting some kind of special treatment, being a professor and all, but it wasn't there. Apparently, intelligence wasn't the coin of the trade at this place. The guy next to me saw me staring at her and clearly cheered up. That's Alex, he said. She's really hot. But don't get your hopes up, Mom. I don't think she's swinging that way. Although you're probably not the first woman to look at her. She's definitely popular, I said. Not in the way you think, he countered back. Most of the people you see sitting with her or going to talk to her work for her. I turned to look at him more seriously. Maybe he could help me after all. Let's find a table and talk, I said. He looked at me questioningly. Don't worry, I just want to find out a few things, I said. And I'll pay for your food and drinks. That actually worked. He raised his hand, A waiter appeared and pointed us to a dirty table that was very close to my target. Yes, I called her my target because she had what I wanted. I hadn't planned anything like this when I left my apartment this morning. But in a matter of minutes, my life was now centered on one thing. I wanted my husband back. I wanted him back very badly. And if I had to get into a fight with some teenage cheerleader to get him back, her pom-poms better be fluffy, because I was serious. I kept thinking that in a serious academic comparison of life experience or compatibility, I should be superior to this girl. Also, because of my recent past, I should have been much more experienced. From my point of view, it would have just been a success. If only I could make Dan forget what I had done to him. We could start fresh and I'd never hurt him again. I'd gladly spend the rest of my life making it up to him. It probably wouldn't be that hard. He should have gotten over his resentment by now. Perhaps he missed me and could even forgive me. On the other hand, if after 6 years or so he is still bitter and angry, it only means that emotionally he still has feelings for me. Otherwise, he would have let go of that anger and stuck with me. My initial assessment of the target was, as I found out, flawed. My newfound friend, whose name was Mark, began to bring me up to speed. I already told you her name is Alexandra, but everyone calls her Alex, he said. I think she's about 25, but with a body like that, no one cares if she's a little old. His line about 25 being old almost made me choke up. It doesn't matter, though, because she's kind of off the market, he said. Look over here, he pointed toward her table. Several guys walked over to her table and started talking to her. She shook her head negatively, and one of the guys said something else to her. She shook her head again, and the guy just angrily walked away. I also noticed that the guys at her table stood up as if they were in defense mode. See, she's grossing everyone out, he said. That's what I meant. She's kind of a one-man woman. But that's not why everybody's after her. Most of them want to work. What do they do for her? I asked. She and her man are business majors, he said. They started the business as a class project and it took off. It's actually brilliant, and so simple that you wonder why no one thought of it before. I looked puzzled. Dan wasn't a business genius. At least he hadn't been when we were married. They have some sort of supersonic temp service, Mark said. I figure when they graduate in a few months, they'll move to full-time. They're already very profitable. You should see their cars. They've got his and her Mustangs, just lovely. He shook his head. What I wouldn't give to be that guy, he said. He's old, but he's really sweet and he's smart as hell. And she loves him like there's no tomorrow. Every time you see her, she's wearing his jacket or one of his things. And they hold hands and hoard. It's disgusting, really. But I'd give my left nut for her to cheer for me like that. His words swept over me. It was as if he knew exactly the things I was most afraid of hearing and said each one. I had to reassess my situation. First, I had to admit that she was prettier than me. Also, she's better built. Obviously, she was also smart. And unlike my knowledge of history, her business acumen was far more practical. Her skills worked in the real world, whereas my intellect was limited to purely academic frameworks. But the worst blow to me was the fact that for years I'd overlooked Dan. I had written him off as inferior to me, while in his own way he was probably as smart as I was. And this girl was able to see him behind his outer shell, to find him and help him realize his potential. While I watched, my Dan came up behind her and leaned over her head so that their heads were upside down against each other. He kissed her very gently in this strange position, and she just absorbed him. Her hands moved up to gently stroke his face. He sat down next to her, and she snuggled up against him with her arms around him, and her face just damn glowed. I couldn't stand to see that little bitch touching him. I guess it was reflected on my face because Mark, who I'd been ignoring since Dan showed up, spoke up again. I told you it's a little nauseating, he said. But they're really cute if you like the whole fairy tale thing. The weird thing is, they're very boring. I mean, no wild parties, they just do things together. Sort of like a boring old married couple. She's got their whole life planned out, and he just goes along with it. He shrugged, making a sort of whatever gesture. I was dating one of their employees, and she told me something really funny, he said. He leaned toward me as if he were imparting some secret information. Their plan is to finish university, get their degrees, and then they'll go on with their business to raise enough money to buy a bigger place to live. They'll get married, and then she'll just want to retire and start having kids." His voice rose when he said the last part, as if it was the strangest or most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. "You can imagine it. What a waste of education," he said. "But I guess they know what they want. I mean, I'm going to travel the world, make tons of money, and not stop for shit." In the back of my mind, I thought, after a few years, you grow up and realize that all this wild shit gets just as boring. Even worse, you start to feel like shit. You feel more like a thing than a person. And you realize that you don't really matter much to anyone. Instead of having someone who really loves you and would do anything for you, you're just an object for them to use for their pleasure. I came here thinking she was some kind of prostitute, and now I realize the whore is me. And even worse, my ex-husband is in love again, perhaps a stronger love than the one we shared. I tossed a couple bills on the table and stood up before Mark even brought the food. In bliss, Dan was only thinking about one person in the cafe and didn't even notice me. Dan. Alex and I had started officially dating. It was weird, funny, unusual, weird, and just wonderful all at the same time. We had so much in common, but also a lot of things we just couldn't get over. We usually just laughed and found a way to work out these issues. Either I gave in or she did. The age difference was never a factor. Mostly because I'm old and she's an old-fashioned girl. We both had trust and giving heart issues because of our past. We were like two birds with broken wings that on our own could never fly, but flying together was not only easy but magical. Our company, Danalex Inc., began as a learning project. We were tasked with figuring out how to modernize an existing business plan or make it more flexible. We decided to create a fake temp agency. It would be a partnership between myself and Alex. By this time, we weren't just dating anymore, but we weren't exactly getting intimate. We did cuddle and kiss a lot, though. I think we were both a little shy at the time. What made our temp agency different was that we utilized a constantly updated resource. Also, our resource had a very broad base to utilize. We utilized college students to fill vacancies. Alex handled the administrative side, and I handled the managerial side. She handled payroll, payments, taxes, billing, records, and so on. I handled scheduling, client meetings, worker meetings, and organizing and running client and worker events. We had spreadsheets, flyers, our business plan, and sample reports. We even went so far as to make letterhead and business cards. It was great. When we got to the professor's pre-defense, he reminded us that this was a group project. And for a group, you need 4 people, at most 3. But he liked our idea. He suggested a couple bright students from our class who were in backward groups. We talked to a few and chose Darla Martin to work with us. We didn't make her a partner, but she became a full part of the team. Our meeting with Darla was a lot of fun. She was tall, thin, and had a very simmering personality. Her first words to us were, "So the professor told you two to really have a band, huh?" She smiled and said she wanted to work with us anyway. "But you guys are hard to talk to. You guys are like us against the world. Are you guys like married or something?" "Or something like that," Alex replied. "But we'll keep you posted." Darla was brilliant in that her skills covered an area that neither Alex nor I excelled in. Darla was a genius at marketing. Alex and I were so busy developing and creating our business plan and procedures that we hadn't thought about how we would market it. Darla took over the marketing. We got our A game. But we must have lost our business cards or flyers somewhere, because the same night we saw our grade, we got a call. Someone had found one of our cards and was trying to hire us. We called Darla and told her about it. She laughed with us. Alex then turned to me with a serious look on her face and asked, "Dan, what are we going to do next?" "Whatever you want, Alex," I replied. "Oh, that's so sweet," Darla said. "No, seriously," Alex said. "What are we going to do after all this?" "I don't want us to drift apart and you working for one company and me working for another. Then we never saw each other. We grew apart. Our lives went to hell, and you started cheating on me." Darla and I looked at her frantically. "And we're getting divorced," she said. "Alex, I would never cheat on you," I said. "I'd die first, and we don't have a sex life as it is." "You guys aren't having fun?" "You're kidding, right?" Darla said. "What's your answer?" asked me. "Let's do it for real," said Alex. Long story short, that's what we did. Our plan was to find situational workers or temporary employees for a wide variety of businesses to supplement or expand our clients' existing staff. If a business needed secretaries or file clerks, we gave them business majors. If they needed designers or draftsmen, we took engineering students. We had chemists, medical technicians, and lab technicians. Virtually any job they needed, we could fill. It was a triple-win situation. Businesses received a steady supply of highly skilled and adaptable workers, some of whom got permanent jobs. College students everywhere need money, so we had no shortage of student volunteers. And we were making money, lots of money. Let's face it, our startup costs were practically zero. We already had everything done for the project. It was pure profit. Alex took over the books, I started calling clients, and Darla started a marketing campaign with flyers, free radio and internet spots, and word of mouth. After a while, I found a much more organized way of screening suitable applicants for positions. I created a system of recommendations from professors in each of the disciplines we needed. Professors received a small percentage for recommending their best and brightest students. This also forced students to work and study harder in hopes of getting those recommendations. Being one of our faculty advisors was a highly sought-after position. If you were a math teacher who worked with us, you had a lot more students in your class because a lot of students wanted that job. I think the best thing that happened was that Alex and I got to spend even more time together. At that point, we didn't have a building. We ran the business out of my apartment. After a day at school and a long evening spent reading books or planning presentations for local businesses, we would sometimes spend several days in a row together. Then Alex started taking her clothes with her just to change there, instead of me taking her home before going out. Or if it was one of our late-night cramming sessions before class. One night, as I was practicing a PowerPoint slideshow for the next day's meeting, I noticed Alex falling asleep. "Come on, sleepyhead, I'll take you home," I said. "I'll just sleep here," she replied. "You could run me over with a feather." The next morning, when Darla came in all bubbly as usual, she asked me, "Where's Alex?" "She's still asleep," I replied. "Why don't you go get her?" she asked. "Did you two have a fight?" "I don't need to go pick her up, she's here," I said. Darla raised her eyebrows a few levels but didn't say a word. "That's how rumors get started," I said. "She slept on the bed and I took the couch." "You're kidding me," Darla said. "You're pretty dumb, aren't you?" she asked. "Aren't you supposed to be older and more experienced?" "Consider this. A woman who clearly likes you is spending the night at your house." She tilted her head as if I had to figure out what the hell she was talking about. "She asked you to stay over too, didn't she?" she asked. "Maybe," I replied. "What do you think she had in mind?" Darla asked. "Maybe she was too tired to go home and just wanted to spend the night," said I. "You know, Dee, we're both dent-free. Maybe she wanted to test me to see if I could be trusted." The door to the bedroom opened and a sleepy Alex came out of there. She then started the shower and closed the bathroom door. "I still can't believe you guys aren't—" "You know, she didn't go home." "Wow, this is getting serious. Everyone in her dorm will probably notice—" "Notice what?" Alex asked, toweling my hair and handing me a brush. "The fact that you didn't go home last night," Darla replied. "I am home, or would be if someone asked me," Alex replied. "What did someone ask you about?" said I. "God, you're so fat," said Darla. So Alex moved in with me. We still didn't have intimacy, but I was over the moon. After the first night in bed, she told me I could sleep in bed with her if I kept my hands to myself. I slept on the couch. I didn't want to risk losing her. The next night, she pulled me onto the bed and simply said, "Please stay." When I woke up the next morning, we were lying together. I was saved by Darla's usual early morning knock on the door. "Hey guys, have you looked into our corporate BB lately? We're doing really well with the money. 25% of it is mine, right? Because I'm buying a car," she said. "You two won't be giving me any more rides." And so began Danalex Inc. and how Alex and I got more serious. Dana. For about 3 weeks, I was settling into my new life. I taught classes, checked paperwork, met with students, checked more paperwork, attended faculty meetings and staff trainings, and checked paperwork. I made a few friends, but most of them were too new to be considered real friendships. I looked around and tried to contact some of our old friends from my married life. The few I could find still wanted nothing to do with me. Apparently, time doesn't heal all wounds, no matter what the old saying claims. I went to the clubhouse, which was 50 miles from home, to make sure I wouldn't run into anyone from school or my new life. Very few men approached me at first, but as it got later on, I got a few bites. Eventually, I let one big, pot-bellied guy take me to a more comfortable place. It turned out to be the back seat of his car. What a romantic. But he actually helped me more than I realized at the time. My session with him was actually a microcosm view of all my relationships since I had broken up my marriage. So I went on with my life, but mostly my heart just ached. When I was teaching classes or walking down the hallways, I never saw Dan or his bimbos. But I heard about them all the time. I'd walk by a math class and the professor would ask, "What is symmetry? Describe something symmetrical." Some pimply-faced nerd would raise his hand and say with a smirk, "Alexandra Stanton." And I'd see those damn Danalex t-shirts on everybody. Even some faculty members wore them. I freaking hated Danalex. One of my new friends, Melva Bryant, decided that living as a hermit wasn't right for me. So she decided that she and I and a couple other female faculty members should have a girls' night out. We decided to meet, oddly enough, at the same bar club I had gone to the week before. Oh joy. But at least I'll get to go out. We decided that I would go with her and meet up after class the next day. She called me an hour before the meeting and told me she'd be a few minutes late because she had to turn in her list, and as a new teacher, she thought I'd be interested. In fact, I don't think she knew. When I walked into the staff office, I heard her voice in the cubicle. I figured she had students, so I took a seat outside to wait. She saw me, gestured for me to come in, and I heard her voice say, "This is the new history professor I told you about." As I entered the stall, time slowed down dramatically. I remember seeing a woman's tanned and trim legs that were at least a mile long. That damn tawny-colored hair, falling in waves halfway down the small of her back. She probably had at least a yard of cleavage in her low-cut sweater, and those crystal-clear eyes. When she looked at me, there was no recognition in them. There shouldn't have been, since we'd never met. But Dan recognized me instantly and jerked back, his growl of disgust not hidden fast enough for anyone to see. Before I could utter a word, the little bitch jumped up and came between me and my Dan, as if she was supposed to or could protect him from me. It was then that I decided the bitch had to die. Melva quickly tried to defuse the situation, even though she didn't realize what was going on. "Dan Patterson, I'd like to introduce you to Dana Woodruff Patters." "Damn it," Melva said. "Exactly," Dan replied. "Melva, can we do this tomorrow?" "Call Alex in the morning and you can reschedule." He was leaving too fast to even talk. He never once looked me in the eye. He was just backing away like I was a rabid dog he ran into while jogging. Alex stared after me as they walked away, clearly sizing me up and in her little mind finding a flaw in me. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know," Melva said. "Actually, I still don't know," she said. "Let me guess, sister, cousin, sister-in-law?" "Ex-wife," I snapped back. "Oh shit, I didn't see that coming," Melva exclaimed. "I just thought it must be some kind of nasty incest because of all the tension hanging in the air." "It's still so thick here you can feel it and they're gone," she said. "Funny, you don't seem to be his type." "Why, because I'm not a 20-year-old cheerleader and no brains," I snapped back. "Never underestimate her, she's smart as hell," Melva said. "And if she thinks you're trying to get in between, it could get ugly." "Did you see the way she put herself between you guys?" I just nodded. I was still too shocked to comment. "That's a story I need to hear," she said. "What about the bar?" I asked. "Neither that place nor the lowlifes in it are going anywhere," Melva said. "Besides, you look like you need an unloading. It'll make you feel better." "But tell me something. You knew he was around here somewhere, didn't you?" I nodded, and so did she. She smiled widely. "I could tell because you didn't freak out that much when he saw you, but he looked like he was looking into hell," she smirked. "He couldn't get out of here fast enough. What happened?" "The short version," said I. Melva nodded. "We were married for over 10 years, I began. He worked very hard to support us. Do you see how he treats that rag?" She nodded again with a smile on her face. Yes, I could see that she liked the way he treated this woman. Well, he treated me like that too, I said, then left her dumbfounded. When he loves someone, he just gives him all of himself. No questions asked, no conditions. When I wanted to go back to school, he started working double shifts to pay for my tuition, books, and supplies. After a while, I started to think I had outgrown him and was smarter than him. I started doing things I shouldn't have done, with people I shouldn't have been with. He kept trying to put the spark back into our marriage and trusted me. I spread my hands and turned away from her. Even now, I was ashamed of the way I acted then and what I did. So when he found out I was cheating on him, it just broke his heart and he just left. We never even talked about it. After he had his lawyers serve me with divorce papers 6 years ago, I never heard from him again until today. Of course, I tried to fight it. I refused to sign the papers and refused to meet with his lawyers. I assumed he would have to come to me to get me to sign them, but he never did. His lawyers ended up suing the school I attended and got my scumbag professor fired. I ended up moving on with the scumbag. But after a few years, it went nowhere because we had a disagreement about our relationship. I know how it is with these old academics, Melva said. You thought you were his partner or his academic equal, and he thought you were just his girlfriend or mistress and should just stay home and run the household. Not even close, I said. I thought I was his protege. I knew I wasn't on his level, but I thought he would help me develop my intelligence, like he told me he would. He considered me his personal whore, and when he got sick of me, he passed me on to all his friends who treated me like a dumb rag. So 6 wasted years later, I'm teaching at a community college, and who shows up here? Dan Patterson, who won't even look at me, I replied. Honey, you're too old for him, she said. He's 3 months older than me, I told her. Well, the years don't affect us all the same, she said. You want him back, don't you? With every breath I take, I replied. Find someone else, she said. He did. Besides, she finished, he was almost nauseous when he looked at you. So I wouldn't get your hopes up too high. But if you insist, she said, you have a couple cards to play. None of them will work, but it will at least allow you a little FaceTime with him. What? I asked. First of all, she said, if he's your ex-husband, you can legally hire a lawyer and take him to court to amend your agreement. He's on the verge of getting an RFR with Danalex. What's an RFR? I asked. Really rich, she replied. Since he started the business after your divorce, most judges won't give you a dime, but at least you'll have to communicate to try to settle the petition. Who knows? I nodded. Melva was pretty smart, slippery, but smart. Second, she said, you might want to sit down. Why? I asked. You never signed the papers and he left. Technically, when he left you, she said. You didn't sign the papers, so legally you can still be married. And Dan living with Alexandra could be considered adultery on his part. My eyes went wide when she said that. In short, you cheated and he cheated. It's all for nothing, and you're still married. Most judges will want counseling to try to work out your problems before they give you a divorce. He may even have to stop seeing her for the duration of counseling. I was grinning from ear to ear. Mentally, I was going to take Melva's plan one step further. I was going to have to organize an accident for little Alex. There were several reasons why this was going to happen. I knew that Dan would never willingly give up this little girl. I also knew that she would never give him up either. She would kill me first. And number 3, if something happened to her, Dan would get hurt very badly. Not that I wanted to hurt him, but the facts were there. He'd only loved 2 women in his entire life. So if something happened to this little bitch, who else could he turn to help him through his grief? Helping him cope with the tragic loss of poor little Alex would be a way to blot out my past transgressions. I needed a lawyer, a plan, and makeup. Dan. Alex, we need to go on vacation, I said. 2 questions, she replied. 1. She held up one of her tiny fingers. Where are we going and for how long? She asked. Anywhere, I replied. Let's go to Paris. Women always want to see Paris. I don't, she said. It's just another city. Two, she said, raising another finger up in the air. Why, and more importantly, why now? She asked. It's that evil bitch, isn't it? Should have kicked her ass then. I was really amused by this because Alex was so out of sorts. She's actually not used to using profanity, and here she's saying bitch and ass in the same sentence. Besides, Dana wasn't a huge woman, but Alex was petite. So the idea that she could really kick anyone's ass was amusing. Judging purely on size and disposition, I think most junior high girls could kick Alex's ass. So I had to avoid laughing at her, but her desire to protect me made me love her even more. We're not going to let her run us out of town, no way. We have a business to take care of, she stated emphatically. Besides, I'm already on vacation, she said, snuggling up to me. Every day we're together is a vacation, Dan. It's not what I wanted when I was a little girl. That will come after a while. But right now I can't think of anything I want more than us. I know that old woman hurt you, but I'll never let her do it again. She teaches history, we've both already completed our history requirements. We don't need to have any contact with her. Let's just be ourselves and let her go to hell, she said. Is there anything else, ma'am? I asked. Yes, we need to have a board meeting right now, she smiled. Okay, I said. I'll call Darla and get her down here. Not that kind of board meeting. Her smile grew even brighter. What other ones are there? I asked. The kind we have in our bedroom when we're bored, she said, smiling. Or when I'm bored, she snapped out of her seat and ran for the door. I ran after her, forgetting what I was even worried about. Why was I worried? I was in love with the most beautiful girl in the universe. Why should I care that my dried-up slut ex-wife taught at our school? Because life always wants to piss in your cornflakes, that's why. Dana. Over the next few days, I was very busy and worked very hard. My plan needed work on 3 fronts. First, I needed to find a good attorney to look into both legal aspects of my case. The one that interested me the most was the fact that we could still be married. I hadn't actually signed the damn divorce papers, but I remember there was a clause in them that said they would be approved after a certain period of time, whether I signed them or not. But what was more interesting was that Dan, being the injured party and having filed the lawsuit anyway, just disappeared. Now, if he hadn't signed the papers, the lawsuit could be dismissed. I had hurt him so badly that he just filed and left town. Pursuing Dan for money was secondary because I didn't need Danalex, I only needed Dan. Naturally, his money was going to come with him. The second part of my plan was to work on myself. I joined a gym, got a personal trainer, and started a diet and exercise program. If I wanted to have even a chance to compete with Miss Teen America, I needed to be the best I could be. But it wasn't easy. Even I have to admit that I'm nowhere near as beautiful as she is. And yes, I had fun with the coach too, so what? The last part of my plan involved finding people who hated the little bitch as much as I did. It would be ideal to drag her out of the restaurant or club while Dan waited for her. After they got her out of there, they could do whatever they wanted with her. I wanted them to get it on tape. Then I would show the video to Dan. I needed to make sure he thought she did it of her own free will. Then she'd be no better than me. And the way he treated cheaters, he would have had to leave her. Just imagine his little heart shattering and me flying in to pick up the pieces. A few weeks later, I was ready. My attorney looked into the situation and found out that there was no final judgment on our divorce. We were still effectively married pending the filing of papers. We were actually legally separated, but we had no contact and no property was divided. It was tenuous at best, but it was sufficient for my needs. My attorney told me that 6 years of separation and the fact that I had effectively destroyed the marriage would likely not bring me a dime. They urged me to just let it go and move on with my life. But all I needed was a meeting. Honestly, until I saw my husband with that little bitch, a meeting was more than I had hoped for. But now, if everything went according to plan, I could have the whole package. The day of the appointment came and I dressed and prepared for it thoroughly. I had my hair freshly styled and wore a brand new floral print dress. I was sitting in my attorney Mike Miller's office when the door opened. Things didn't go the way I expected. But then Dan never seemed to do what I expected again. I had hoped he would come alone. But I expected him to bring the Thrash Barbie trailer with him. There was also the possibility that he would bring his lawyer with him as well. What I didn't expect was for them to show up the way they did. He hired the largest law firm in the state specializing in divorce. There were 4 lawyers, 2 legal secretaries, a paralegal, and their own transcriptionist who recorded the meeting and gave copies to both parties. After the legal team entered, Dan walked into the room holding his bimbo's hand. This time, I was actually able to get a good look at her. The first time I saw her up close was too crazy for me to really look at her. I have to admit, the bitch is really beautiful. And unfortunately for me, it's not makeup or plastic surgery. She's just naturally goddamn gorgeous. Damn, this is gonna be tough. She also had the kind of lips that told me that if I ever farted in its direction, she'd rip my lungs out through my nose and then make me eat them. She was also dressed like an adult today, which made me realize that she might be a little older than I first thought. She was wearing a beautiful black dress that must have cost an arm and a leg. It was very conservative. Her hair was styled into one long braid and tied back in a ponytail. The little bitch turned out to be a lot smarter than I gave her credit for. Her outfit made mine look a lot less serious. Then I noticed her real attack. She hadn't let go of his hand for a second, and now, sitting at the table with their still joined hands, I saw it. The largest sapphire engagement ring I had ever seen. The sapphire alone was large enough to choke an elephant. It was surrounded by a double row of beautiful white diamonds. That bitch was never going to marry Dan. After my lawyer made his statement, I realized we were never going to see a trial. He was good, but he was out of his league. Dan's legal team crushed him. By the end of the meeting, he was running around them and getting them coffee. Really, he managed to score the only critical point I had. In order to sign the papers, I needed a face-to-face meeting with Dan. That was the real reason for this whole mess. The counselor explained that I felt bad about the way our marriage ended and that I was completely to blame. I had gone through counseling for my unconscionable actions and wanted to help him calm down a bit. His lawyers looked at it and said it sounded very reasonable. If that's my only request, then we can sign the papers and end this here and now. Dan nodded his head silently, and the lawyers started to leave the room to give us some privacy. 10 minutes, Dan said. You give your speech and we'll call it a day. I'm staying, Alex said, rising. She had the look of a cornered lioness, and her eyes drilled holes in my face. That's fine, I lied. I was hoping you'd stay. Both Alex and Dan seemed surprised that I wanted her to stay. I had hoped to be alone with Dan again, but I had planned for her to be around. First, Dan, I wanted to tell you that I apologize from the bottom of my heart for the way I treated you, and also for the way our marriage ended. It was completely my fault. You did nothing for it, and you deserved better. Alex, at your age, you probably don't realize it, but it's hard for a woman to have a career and a home life. I wanted academic success more than anything and sacrificed everything important to try to achieve it. Unfortunately, I rolled the dice and achieved neither. The people who were leading me were just taking advantage of me, and by the time I realized what I had lost, it was too late. I still remember the hurt in your eyes when you found out Dan. It bothered me, but not enough to make me stop what I was doing. If I had the chance to do it all over again, I think I'd come to you first. Because I know you would try to help me in any way you could. That's why I'm really glad you found someone to help you get over me. And I hope your life together will be even better than the one we had. I was truly shocked when you two walked into Melva's office the other day. I had no idea you were enrolled here, Dan. I also didn't realize you were dating someone or even still in town. All of our old friends won't have anything to do with me, so there were no friendly voices to alert me to your whereabouts. I hope my sincere apology will help ease the tension between us, and I know it will take some time, but hopefully we can be friends someday. Alex, if I hurt you in any way that day, I apologize for that as well. But it's not easy to see the only man you ever loved happy with someone else. And you both seem to be blissfully happy. That's all I can say, so please forgive me. I could tell I was partially successful. The little bitch's face softened a little, and she stopped looking like she wanted to bite her nails. Dan, however, was still just as angry as he had been from the beginning. I could tell he wasn't buying anything. They stood up, nodded to me, and headed for the door. She looked back at me and smiled a sort of sad smile. I wished I could read her mind so I knew what she was thinking. But Dan didn't even look at me. I couldn't understand why. If he still hated me so much, that meant he still had feelings for me. If he still had feelings for me, why was he with a Girl Scout? Dan. Alex, as usual, was willing to see only the good in people. Since the last conversation with Dan had ended, her anger at Dan had dissipated. She tried to reassure me by telling me that she loved me no matter what, and if I loved her just as much, Dana couldn't hurt us. On the other hand, I didn't trust the bitch as far as I could throw her, so I decided to seek help. Without Alex's knowledge, I hired a private investigator. I wanted to find out everything Dana did from the time she woke up in the morning until she went to bed at night. I found out a bunch of things that I found interesting. Some of the people she was seeing were suspicious too. She was seen giving money to Brian Austin, the same asshole I saved Alex from during our one and only fight. From that statement, please don't think that Alex and I didn't fight, because we fight all the time. It's just that our arguments are very short because neither of us care about anything more than each other. So if she wants to go to a party and I want to watch soccer, I DVR the game and we don't stay at the party for more than an hour or two. I can't think of anything that is more important to me than Alex, and in my heart, I hope she feels the same way. I contacted a friend of mine who had just gotten a degree in criminal justice and laid out my case to him. Dana had been seen with a known dealer and she was passing him money through Brian. She seemed to be socializing with everyone she could find who didn't like me or Alex. Greg told me that my evidence did seem suspicious, but it wasn't enough to investigate. So that week I just stayed with Alex every night. When the weekend came, she was ready to freak out. "Dan, if you love me, take me out," she said. "I don't care where we go, to dinner or dancing or a movie. Let's just get out of here." Despite my wariness, I could never say no to Alex, so why start now? Besides, all the things she wanted to do were quite public and I didn't see anything wrong with that. Besides, we'd bring Darla with us. A second pair of eyes wouldn't hurt. In the end, we decided to go to the cafe because it was one of our favorite places. It was busy enough that no one was trying to do anything there. There were just too many people there and the place itself wasn't that big. As part of my paranoia, I called a few guys who worked for us from time to time and offered them triple the time for a couple hours of watching Alex and me at the cafe. They thought it was stupid, but it was my money and they were happy to get it. As soon as we got inside and started making our way to our favorite table in the back, the hairs on my back stood up. I had a really bad feeling about this. Looking around the cafe, I saw Brian and a couple other guys who had asked Alex out, gotten turned down, and were not happy about it. I wasn't that bothered, though, because I saw my boyfriends too, and we had more of them. The final shock came when we got to our table and saw someone sitting there. The shock wasn't that the table was occupied. The shock was who was occupying it. It was Dana. She had a different haircut, dyed her hair, and wore a dress that must have cost her at least a couple of months' paychecks. I wondered what the hell she was trying to pull off. As soon as she saw us, she waved us over. Naturally, I pretended not to notice her and started looking for another table. Alex elbowed me in the ribs, grabbed my arm, and started walking towards a table. "Hey, Dana, can we join you?" she asked. Dana. It all happened on Friday night. Brian and I and a few of his friends had been sitting in the coffee shop all week. We sat there night after night just waiting for them to show up. I couldn't believe they were stalling for so long, but I wasn't going to pass up an opportunity like this. The plan was very simple. Alex's drink would be spiked with the cocktail we had made especially for her. Brian and the guys would snatch her out the back door. She would then be taken to the scene of the second part of my plan. There were at least 10 other guys there waiting for her. The funny thing is that I first started by looking for guys who didn't like her. I couldn't find any except for Brian, of course. So then we started looking for guys who did like her. Then guys reached out to us and we had to hold them back, so Brian, his 2 friends, and 10 people at my house. I liked the number 13 because it reminded me of the Last Supper in the Bible. It was supposed to be this little sissy's last supper with my man. She just didn't know it yet. After it was over, she had 2 options. 1, just break up with Dan. The second was to get someone to show him the DVD. Then he would break up with her. He'd be heartbroken too, and if the bitch cared one bit about him, she wouldn't want that. "How are you doing, Alex?" I asked, smiling. "I'm great," she replied cheerfully, snuggling up to Dan under his arm. She smiled and looked around the cafe. There was another girl with them as well. I didn't bother asking her name, and she didn't volunteer it. Alex ordered drinks for all of them and brought me another beer. I noticed that Dan wasn't drinking. He only had a Pepsi and the bottle was unopened. They got up to dance while the waiter brought them their drinks. He nodded to me, and I realized he had done what he was paid to do. I smiled myself as I sat back and watched their last dance. Really, you couldn't call it a dance. When we got married, Dan hated dancing. I often danced with others and he would just sit at the table and watch. He didn't do that with her. He would get up and dance. I was impressed with him. He had clearly changed during our separation, and for the better. She, on the other hand, was just wrapping her arms around him. It was damn disgusting. It was almost like watching her dancing on my husband's lap. I tried to hide my displeasure and hoped I succeeded. Everyone in the cafe was watching them. Finally, they returned to their table and took their drinks. Alex, as I expected, ordered some kind of frou-frou drink. It was pink in color and was in a glass with a small umbrella. It might as well have had a little Barbie doll attached to it. Dan kept his eyes on me. They went back to the dance floor, this time leaving me with another girl. Dan seems to be doing well, I said, trying to make polite conversation. You mean since you ripped his heart out with a stupid goddamn spoon and left him to mess around with some ancient, boring old farts? She said, smiling. I stared at her in shock. Look, bitch, I may be Alex's best friend, but I sure as hell don't look anything like her, she said. Alex is living in her own little fantasy world with Dan right now. But she's really tough. She's been through some pretty bad relationships, and so has Dan. And if you think for 1 second that she's just going to stand there while you try to hop on your broom and fly off with her man, you're a damn moron. If you make one move in his direction, she's going to lay your dried-up old ass down, Grandma. And if she can't, I will. I'd never seen anything like her. The whole time she was saying these things to me, she was smiling. Anyone looking at us would have thought we were just having a pleasant and polite conversation. I didn't even have time to think of a response before Dan and Alex came back to the table. Alex announced that she was going to the ladies' room. Dan looked at Darla and she got up to follow Alex. Alex looked at Darla as if she wanted Darla to stay with me and Dan. Finally, Darla followed Alex. I was alone with my husband for the first time in almost 7 years. So, Daniel, I think we're past the I'm sorry part, but I wanted you to know that you've really made good progress. You've gotten a lot. Leave it alone, Dan said in the coldest voice I'd ever heard. His voice was so cold that I swear every time he opened his mouth, a little light lit up inside, and I looked for the Frigidaire sign. He looked at me like I was a bug he was about to squash. His eyes were completely devoid of any emotion. I shuddered, and I realized I'd made a mistake. But now it was too late to stop. In that moment, I realized I was in a hopeless situation. The only way to keep him and Alex apart was for one of them to die. And if she died, he would turn heaven and earth upside down to find whoever was responsible. I had no way of getting him back ever. Looking toward the restrooms in hopes of catching Brian's eye, I saw that I was already too late. From his angle, Dan couldn't see as Alex began to stagger to her feet, and Brian came out from around the corner and grabbed her with one hand. Darla tried to scream, and Brian viciously punched her in the face and she fell. Brian then picked up Alex and headed out the back door. All at once, 4 or 5 guys ran after them, yelling for them to warn Dan. I grabbed Dan's hand and said, "Wait, Dan, she's no good for you. She's too young. She's not smart enough for you." Dan looked at his hand that I had grabbed him by. I guess that was his version of a warning. It was also the last thing I remember before I fell backwards, smashing the table and passing out. Dan. Walking out of the club that Friday night, I was more scared than I had ever been in my life. I jumped in the car as a couple of my boyfriends pointed at the taillights receding into the night. I didn't know what kind of car it was, and I didn't care. Whoever did this couldn't get away, and when I caught him, it would be over. I left the parking lot to the squeal of exhausted rubber. As soon as I hit the road, I pushed the gas pedal to the floor and listened to the howl of the supercharger. I was catching up so fast that I passed another car with a few of my guys in it. I was about to put my nitrous oxide gas into action when I saw the car slow down and pull into the driveway. I didn't want to let them know I was onto them, so I continued down the driveway to the next house. I got out of my Mustang and ran back toward the house. I entered the house ready to be destroyed. As I looked around, I heard a door slam behind me. Alex was nowhere to be seen by me. All I saw was a bunch of guys playing cards. At this point, none of the guys present were paying attention to me. To them, I was just another guy. I started to stagger toward the door, and one of the guys grabbed my arm. "Hey, asshole, who says you have to go first?" he said. "I won the damn prank, so I'm getting some after Brian's done. So just sit down and take a number." I grabbed a heavy wine bottle off the table and smashed it over his head. He collapsed and fell into a puddle at my feet. As I looked around the room, there was silence for a second, and time seemed to slow down. I heard a voice that seemed almost comically slow say, "Oh shit, it's him." I grabbed the other guy by the neck and smashed him across the card table they were playing cards on. The room started to clear and all the guys ran for the exit. I silently opened the door just in time to see my Alex, barely on her feet, fighting off Brian Austin. She collapsed into a chair, and if I hadn't been so angry, it would have been funny. Brian turned around, but he was too late. My punch hit the side of his head, twisting it. Then I kicked him in the side. Then I felt my hands grabbed from behind me and pulled me away from Brian. "Stop it. You're going to destroy him." "That was the plan," I told the officer. The cop just looked at his partner and said, "We didn't hear that." I walked over to Alex, took off my t-shirt, and covered her with it. 2 EMTs came in and sat her down. They looked into her eyes and measured her vital signs. "She's on something," one of them said. "We better get her to the hospital." The officer who grabbed me said, "And we'll take him down to the station to answer some questions." Greg burst into the room and started talking to the officers who nodded. "We'll be right outside," the officer said. "Dan, drink this," Greg said, handing me a small vial of clear liquid. "What is it?" I asked. "You want to go to jail?" he asked. I drank the vial down to the bottom. It tasted like cleaning solution. Greg opened the door and the officers stepped back. They handcuffed me and started to put me in the patrol car. "Hold on," Greg said. He beckoned the EMTs over to him. "Take a sample of his blood too," he said. One of the techs ran to the truck and came back with a needle. "Roll up your sleeve, sir," he said. Greg smiled as the patrol car pulled out of the driveway. My arm stung like hell from the needle, but I had other considerations. First and foremost, I needed to find out what was going on with Alex. I also wondered why I was going to jail. Everything became clear over the next few hours. Alex was left at the hospital overnight for observation. She really wanted to see me, but she wasn't allowed out until more tests were done in the morning. I wasn't facing any charges at this point, but I could have 4 assault cases against me, plus a speeding and reckless driving case. Basically, it looked like I just freaked out in a coffee shop and beat the crap out of my ex-wife for no reason. I then allegedly jumped in my car and drove off, speeding. I drove to someone's house, invaded a private party, and then assaulted 3 men there. At that point, I was only being held for questioning and charges were to follow. Darla came to see me. Her left eye was swollen and closed. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Much better already," she replied. "Did they give you painkillers for your eye?" I asked. "Was that what made you feel better?" "Nah, seeing that asshole who hit me in the hospital after you were done with him," she smiled. "Now that made me feel better." "Alex is pissed," she said quietly. "She doesn't understand why you're not with her." "They're holding me for questioning," I said. "Oh, I'd better go and tell her that now," she said. "What makes her think I wasn't there?" asked I. "She thinks you think she's damaged goods," Darla laughed. "What?" said I to Darla's receding back. Almost 2 hours later, a very solid-looking man walked into the room. His hair was completely gray. He was wearing a suit that had seen better days. I don't think I'd ever seen him before, but there was something familiar about him. He looked at me over his glasses. In his hands, he held an official-looking folder. "You don't look like the type," he said. "What type?" I asked. He gently but firmly took my hand, rolled up my sleeve, and looked at my arm. "Definitely not the type," he said. "I'm the chief of detectives in charge of your investigation. You seem like a reasonable guy, so why don't you tell me the story? I already know what the evidence points to, but I'd like to hear your side of the story." "I really need to see Alex," I said. He looked at the folder and, without looking back at me, said, "Ah, the alleged victim." "What do you mean alleged?" I asked, my eyes narrowing more than slightly. "Calm down, buddy. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this," he said. "Going by the evidence, there are a few ways I can look at it," he added. "1, you and your girlfriend, who I might add is a little young for you, but that's neither here nor there. You and her are at a club. She leaves you sitting there with your ex-wife. She does it because she's jealous of the ex with the ball and chain. So she takes and leaves with another guy to make you jealous. He looked at me over his glasses and continued talking. I think he was trying to see how I would react to his speculation. You hit your ex in a fit of rage and race after her on her tail. You violated several traffic laws and entered a private residence uninvited. Then you assaulted several citizens to stop her consensual affair. That's the biggest load of crap I've ever heard, I said. So why don't you tell me something better then? He said. I sat back down and tried to calm myself down. First of all, nothing was consensual, I said. How do you know? He asked. Because she's not, I replied. She's very beautiful, he said. Maybe there's a secret side to her. I jumped to my feet again, ready for a fight. Sit your ass back down, he growled. Screw you, I yelled back just as loudly. Alex is the air I breathe, I told him. There's no way she would do something like that. I have complete faith in her. So you got lucky, you ran away without realizing anything. To try to save her instead of calling the police like you should have, he said. I had to get to her, I said. And you were very lucky, he said. But what if you hadn't been so lucky? If she was out of it and you saw her with a bunch of guys and you showed up in the middle of it? What then? He asked. I would have destroyed them all, I replied. And then what? He asked. I'd probably go to jail, I said. And then what? He asked. What about you and your girlfriend? What do you mean? I asked. Would you still be able to be with someone after seeing that picture? Even if it was against their will, it would take a long time to overcome. You're not a spring chicken to anyone. Number one, I said. I already told you Alex isn't like that. If you knew her, you'd realize she's the sweetest, most special person on this planet. And if I'd been late and she'd been attacked, I'd still love her for the rest of my damn life, no matter what. If you knew us, you'd realize that, I said. Oh, I already knew that, he said. I've known how she felt about you for a long time. I just needed to hear you say the same thing about her. And I think she needed to hear it too. He opened the door and there stood Alex and Darla. Both of them looked like they could barely stay on their feet. Alex slowly walked over to me and took my hand. She slowly ran her hand around me. I was so scared, she said. Come on, you knew I was coming for you, I said as I hugged her. Oh, not again, she said. I was worried my Uncle John wouldn't like you. I had no doubt you'd drive a gas tanker truck through hell for me, just like I would for you. I kept telling those guys that when you got here, they weren't going to have any fun. She shook her head and grabbed my hand. Let's go home, she said. They're holding me for questioning, I said. You can go, said Detective Uncle John. When you talked to Greg last week, we started following your ex, but we didn't say anything about it. We had 2 cars following you all night. But you broke out of there and fled in that car before we even realized anything had happened. Your ex didn't confess to anything. The 2 guys she hired besides Brian both admitted to us that she planned the whole thing with Brian. She wanted you back. He wanted my niece, of course. She went berserk while in the cell and we had to subdue her. We'll probably need you both to testify, but other than a speeding ticket, I see no reason to charge you. Epilogue. Alex and I returned home and lived happily ever after. 3 weeks later, we were married. We didn't even wait until after graduation. We continued to build our company for about a year and probably would still be doing it now if only our plans hadn't changed a bit. Alex somehow got pregnant, so whatever. Anyway, we sold Danalex for a moronic amount of money. Alex wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and insisted we stay at home together. Dana never recovered from the incident. A few months after the incident, I was called to a nearby psychiatric hospital to visit her. Her doctor said that seeing me might help her deal with her problem. I expected her to be either very apologetic and remorseful or angry and bitchy. I was quite surprised to find neither. At first, the doctor wanted me to go in alone, so Alex just stood outside by the door. Hi, Dana, I said uncertainly. Why do you call me Dana? She asked. Do I look anything like the bitch who hurt you? she asked. She stood up and all I could do was hold back a laugh. She looked ridiculous. She had rolled up her pant legs so that they looked like very short shorts. She also tied her shirt up so that it looked like some kind of weird cropped top. She jumped up to me with her arms outstretched and hugged me desperately. 2 orderlies came into the room and separated us. "Tell them who I am," she said. Her eyes seemed manic, and she continued to look around the room. "Who am I supposed to tell that you're Dana?" I asked. I felt a small empathic connection with her. "I'm Alex," she replied. "You're Alex." I just walked back out the door to her doctor's office without saying anything to her. "Do you see a problem?" her doctor asked. "We need to give her some reason to try to accept our treatment program. She seems to be fixated on you, to the point where she would do anything to be a part of your life. Would you be willing to be a part of her treatment?" At this point, Alex spoke quietly. "I think I know how to help her," she said. Alex walked into the room and said, "Hi, Dana." She pulled me into the room and kissed me hard. Then she turned around and looked at Dana, who was startled. "Once upon a time you had a man who loved you very much." She kissed me again. "You threw him away." She kissed me again. "I caught him," she kissed me. "You broke his heart into 1,000,000 pieces, and I put them all back together again." "Better than new," I said. "Have a nice life, Dana," she said as we walked away, laughing. I guess we knew it was a cruel thing to do, but after everything I and we had been through, we just didn't care. We never saw or heard from Dana again. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.